Excellencies, Your Highnesses, distinguished guests, to this exciting third panel of the IDC conference. It's my pleasure to moderate an extremely diverse and experienced group of panelists on the topic of strengthening research and development in the defense industry. And as I think you'll see also, how do we ensure that the benefits are also captured in the civilian sector and for the economy and society as well. As His Excellency mentioned, my name is Dr. Noah Rafford. I'm the Chief of Global Affairs for an organization called the Dubai Future Foundation, which is the Dubai government's semi-governmental agency responsible for facilitating innovation in the civilian sector. We're under the management of His Excellency Omar Al-Alama, Minister of State for Artificial Intelligence and Remote Work Applications. And our job is to explore the opportunities and challenges that emerging business models, emerging technologies, and emerging social preferences impact on the economy, and then test those out and share those with the world. One of the things that we are particularly keen to focus on is emerging technology. In particular, much of the emerging technologies which are being developed today are done in academic and private sector contexts. As you all know, this is increasingly important in defense as well, and defense-related industries such as aerospace, space exploration, and similar topics. I have 5 panelists today who I'll welcome to the stage very shortly, who are all experts in this intersection. They are people who have careers of experience exploring how to facilitate R&D in defense, how to ensure society benefits from that, and how to maximize the speed at which our security forces are able to respond to the threats that they face, and our economies are able to take advantage of the innovations that they produce. So I'm welcoming them each to the stage, and because these are all quite extraordinary people, I'm going to ask a slightly different format. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and give a bit of background on their experience, because as I think you'll see, there's some very interesting commonalities between them. And then I'm going to give them 5 or 6 minutes to present some remarks that we developed over the last few days around their experience in their respective countries, entities, and agencies on how to facilitate R&D in defense. We then have a series of questions which will hopefully get into a lively conversation and then wrap up on the hour. So, without further ado, please let me welcome His Excellency Faisal Al-Banai, who is the CEO and Managing Director of EDGE, as well as the Secretary General of the Advanced Technology Research Council, something which I'm sure we'll be speaking about very shortly. Your Excellency, please. It's also my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Tariq Al-Husseini, who's the CEO of the Tawazun Economic Council. Tariq, please, Your Excellency. Joining us from the Republic of Korea as well is Deputy Minister Yoon Sok Kim, who is the Deputy Minister for the Office of Military Force and Research Management. Please, Your Excellency, join us on stage as well. Our last guest in person is Lieutenant General retired Theodoros Lagios, who is the General Director at the General Directorate of Defense Investment and Armaments for the Hellenic Ministry of Defense in Greece. Please, General, thank you. Welcome. And then, in what I am told is a historic first, we have one more guest joining us virtually on Zoom, who I believe is the first official Israeli delegate to speak at IDC. So we have a world's first here. Please welcome Dr. Uzi Rubin, who's a senior researcher at the Jerusalem Institute of Strategic and Security Studies. And Dr. Uzi has assured me, although he loves his work, it's in no relationship to our favorite machine gun. Welcome, Dr. Uzi.
Welcome.
So as you can tell, we have quite an extraordinary lineup. As mentioned, I'm just going to ask each of them to introduce themselves and share a little bit about their backgrounds. I know some of you quite well for quite a long time. Some of you are new faces, so welcome. But perhaps starting with yourself, Your Excellency. Please, a little bit of your background and your experience, and then your opening remarks.
Assalamu alaikum. Faisal Al-Banai, I head the EDGE group. Basically, it's the consolidation of the defense industry and the security sector in the UAE. So all the companies that cater for the defense and security sector that are owned as national assets are now pulled under one group with few key objectives. At the end of the day, we're here to achieve national sovereignty for critical assets. We are here to be able to create a critical mass industry to advance the capability built in advanced technology. And at the same time, we are here to be part of UAE's strategy of moving to a knowledge economy and having a destination to talent from across the globe and local talent to enter the space of advanced technology and have a large player become a key destination for them. While on another similar role, I had the Advanced Technology Research Council as the Secretary General. A similar role, again, to drive the momentum and critical size of our research capability. A similar objective of building critical research technologies in the country. We've announced 7 centers, between quantum technology centers to robotics center to directed energy center, with the final aim of, again, building that critical mass and building a very long-term research and development capability here in the country. So I think it's an exciting period for advanced technology in this country. I think we are gaining a lot of momentum in building that critical size. And I think UAE in the coming years will definitely take a strong leading position when it comes to advanced technology and advanced technology capabilities in this space. So, thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Could you provide a little bit of background just on how you came to EDGE? Because we know each other from your previous life,
Yes.
which I think is relevant for the topic of this panel, which is perhaps about public sector, private sector collaboration.
So this is probably my first job that I switched from officially from private sector owner to semi-government owned entity. So my previous life used to be in the mobility business for some that you know, setting up a company called Axim Telecom. And the transition into this sector has been through setting up of the cyber capability company, Dark Matter, for around 4 or 5 years. So this was the segue of entering EDGE in this regard. So that was the setting up of the cyber capability here in the country as an industry of various products, whether from secure comm or other defensive products. And then we made the switch from the private sector to fully, I would say, moving from a business owner to being an employee in this regard, in this role. But I would say the main advantage that was set up is the country leadership, and the visionary of the leadership is this company is operating with the startup mindset. So although we have a lot of great established companies that got pulled together, but we were given the mandate and the authority to operate with a startup mindset, with an agile mindset, and with an ecosystem of my colleagues like Tariq and others that as a country of really trying to transform us being able to move very fast. So in one way, yes, it's a different role, but frankly, in another way, I think the vision of the leadership has really set the stage for us to be extremely agile and nimble in what we need to do. And I think, as they say, the future is only starting now.
Wonderful, thank you. Your Excellency Tariq, please, you've got quite an extraordinary background as well. I'd love to hear an introduction of your background and what you do now, please.
So I'm very proud and happy that I started my career in the armed forces, working in the AH-64 Apache attack aircraft, where I work in the upgrades and development of that platform. Then I joined the UAE Flight Test Center when it was first established, and from that to UAE R&D Center. After that, I joined the Yashat, which is a satellite company, who created the first global hybrid satellite that serves military and commercial in one platform. That was never done before. From there, I participated in the establishment of the National Electronic Security Authority at that time, then joined the board of the Space Agency, where we work in establishing that as well. And from there, I've been honored to become the new CEO of Tawajan Economic Council. Tawajan Economic Council is the custodian of the defense industry in the UAE and managing the offset obligations that generated from the military procurement. And we are also a support tool for the armed forces in their procurement process. We work closely with the MOD right now to develop the development strategy roadmap, identifying the focus sectors and the building blocks. And we are also working very closely with EDGE in identifying what are the national projects that we want to drive. There is always this healthy debate, how much should be done under government, how much should be done under company, and what's the enterprise role to do with it. But we're trying to learn from the international examples and try to apply those best practices, globally speaking. If you look at our industry specifically, you will look that most of the funding is normally government-driven. We're talking about global budget of R&D of around 1.7 trillion. If you look at the advanced countries, 70 to 80% from this is coming from actually enterprises, while only 20% will come from government or non-profit organization. But when it comes to the defense sectors, I think the ratio is inverted, where most of the funding for those developments are coming from governments. And that's mainly due to the diversity of the clients. Here you have very limited number of clients. Most likely the National Army will be the biggest provider to the national industry. And since you have limited clients, to be very innovative and trying to create a huge product line is very challenging for the industries. And that's why the defense industry normally is very cautious with their R&D money. And they want always to cooperate with government to make sure that it's done through government funding and it meets the government requirement.
Excellent. Thank you, Excellency. We'll come back to that particular relationship between the Advanced Technology Research Council's EDGE and yourself. There's a very powerful synergy there. But I'd like to move on to our virtual guests now. Dr. Uzi, please, welcome. Could you please introduce yourself? And you have quite an interesting background as well. Unfortunately, you weren't able to be here in person due to travel restrictions. But welcome, please, and please present yourself in your opening remarks.
Thank you, Noah. It's a privilege to participate in this conference. I only regret that I can't do it in person because of the travel ban in Israel, because of the COVID-19 situation. But it's really a privilege and I think a historical moment. But before I start, I want to congratulate the UAE for the great achievement of putting this Mars probe in orbit, the Hope Mars probe. It gives us all hope and well done, people. My background, I'm an aerospace engineer, educated in the Israel Technology Institute of Technology and in Ransanit Polytechnic Institute. I spent part of my career, about 1/3 of it, in industry, the Israel aerospace industry, where I rose from the ranks and running engineer to program manager. And then I was asked to join the Ministry of Defense, where I spent about a quarter of a century running a major defense program. One of them is the Israel National Space Launcher, which was under my responsibility. And the other is the Aero weapon missile defense system, which I ran from a blank page all the way to the delivery of operational missiles to the Israel Air Force. I retired because we have a mandatory retirement age in Israel, like the British civil service. And for the next 15 years, I consulted the Israeli government and Israeli defense companies in various projects. And then I really retired when I went back to school and did my PhD studies and obtained a PhD in political science. It took about 2 years ago. And that brings us to here to Dubai, and I'm at your service.
Thank you. And could you explain a little bit about the work you've been doing around centers of excellence and the model for R&D innovation in Israel, for example?
Well, actually, my doctoral thesis was about innovation and conservatism in defense establishment, not just industries, because it's a whole complex. It's a government and the industries, some of them government industries, some of them private industries, and how to keep the spark of innovation going. And that was the gist of my thing. That my lesson of that is that we have in innovation two issues. One is what to innovate. This is straightforward. I mean, it's not simple. You look at the crystal ball and you have to decide where's your business future, what do you want to do, and where to do it. So what's the face of the future battlefield? What's the face of home security? I think it's conceptually straightforward. It's very difficult to achieve, but conventional. But the problem is not only what to innovate. And this is, I think, which is something which is not recognized by everyone. It's how to innovate. Because innovation is thinking out of the box. And we all, as human beings, love our zone of comfort. We are conservatives. Some of us less, some of us more, but usually we like to be where we are. And this is becoming more and more accentuated as the organization becomes bigger and bigger. The bigger the organization is, the more hierarchic it is, it's harder for it to innovate, and it's harder for it to realize that it has a difficulty in innovating. You have a big company, it has products, a line of products, it likes a line of products, and usually they don't want to hear about something that disrupts the product. Disruption is the enemy. So how to innovate, I think, is more difficult to grasp than what to innovate.
Great,
in spite of all the concepts.
I think we'll come back to that. Excuse me for interrupting. This is obviously touching on some of the golden threads here. I'd like to pass the microphone to His Excellency Kim, who is the Deputy Minister for the Office of Military Force and Research Management in the Republic of Korea, who's doing some very interesting innovation work around R&D. He will have his remarks in Korean, please. So please put the headset on and turn to channel 3 for English and 2 for Arabic. Your Excellency, please, the floor is yours.
예, 안녕하십니까. 제 이름은 김윤석입니다. 예, 저는 민간 공무원으로서 30년 이상 우리 대한민국 국방부에서 근무를 하고 있고, 제가 주로 맡았던 업무는 군수나 획득 업무 이외에 국방 정책, 그리고 예산, 또 보건, 복지 분야까지 폭넓게 근무를 해왔습니다. 현재 제가 맡은 업무는 전력 자원관리실장인데, 실제로 구체적으로 하는 업무는 군수 업무, 그리고 시설 업무, 그리고 무기체계 획득에 관련된 업무를 총괄적으로 수행하고 있습니다. 오늘 이 자리에 초청해 주셔서 감사드리고, 우리 진행자뿐만 아니라 같이 발표를 하는 그 스피커분들과 같이 자리를 함께 하게 되어서 영광입니다.
Thank you, Your Excellency. And last but certainly not least, we're honored to have Lieutenant General retired Theodoros Lagios, who is responsible, as I understand it, for the Directorate of Defense and Investments and Armaments within the Hellenic Ministry of Defense. This is going to kick off the question part of our session after his remarks, because also Greece, as you know, is the foundation of, well, the humanities. And when we're talking about innovation in R&D, it's not just technical, it's not just software, it's also organizational, it's also training. And so please, Your Excellency.
Thank you very much, Noah. Thank you for the invitation in this very, very distinguished event. I'm Lieutenant General Theodoros Lagios. I'm a General Director in General Directorate of Procurement and Investment in Hellenic Ministry of Defense. My background, I joined in Hellenic Air Force Academy in 1981 and graduated in 1985. I passed all these responsible position from second lieutenant until the lieutenant general in the B branch that involved with education, evaluation, and all issues with Hellenic Air Force General Staff. I am in a position on General Director since November 2019, when I retired in March 2019. My flight background, my flight logbook has more 3,300 hours in flight in fighters and trained aircraft. Also, I served in a NATO permanent delegation of Greece in Brussels, and I was national representative in air defense issues and nuclear issues. And also, for me, is very important to involve with this very, very, I can say, an issue for the future, not for the present time. And let me analyze this. At the verge of the fourth industrial revolution, critical aspects of human activity suffer the process of intense and transformative changes. The ongoing automation of traditional manufacturing and industrial practices, along with the fusion of technological advances in artificial intelligence, partnered with machine learning robotics, integrated and network advanced sensor technology, Internet of Things, machine-to-machine communication, genetic engineering, quantum computing, additive manufacturing, etc., are leading to a paradigm, is a Greek word, shift that's profoundly altering the way we live and radically disrupting almost every business sector, as well as defense capabilities, cooperation and planning. Autonomous systems powered by artificial intelligence are set to play an increasing role in defense and security by reducing manpower demands, expediting decision-making, and taking over dangerous tasks. Having in mind that technological superiority was always considered as a key factor for strategic superiority, focusing on defense interest innovation constantly emerges as a challenging objective. This kind of innovation is a crucial factor for the optimum adoption and usage of disruptive for industrial revolution technologies is the defense sector can be effectively mobilized by strengthening the defense industry's R&D outcome. But this is not always an easy to solve issue. Additionally, the rapidly progressive but also complex and unpredictable features of the fourth industrial revolution, innovation procedures demands the constant adaptation of the R&D processing and the fast elaboration of new R&D models. Bearing in mind that the bringers of innovation are, namely, the small and medium enterprises, as well as the academia and the research and technology organizations, it is straightforward the deduction that those actors must play an important role in the effort and consequently participate in future collaboration schemes. These public-private partnerships seems a flexible way to efficiently align governmental R&D investment with private investments in the commercial sector. I think that is the first portion of this very, very interesting issue. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Lieutenant General. There are three themes which I've heard emerging here, and I'd like to discuss them. The first is how to facilitate collaboration between the state, in particular the defense sector, and to benefit from the lessons in speed and innovation of the private sector. I think I'll ask Your Excellencies Faisal and Tariq to address that first. The second question is, assuming that we do that well, of course, many of us are involved in bilateral or international cooperation agreements. So how do we facilitate, given export controls and IP restrictions, collaboration across our international borders? I think I will ask His Excellency Kim to address the IP question. And then finally, I'd like to explore, as I mentioned, the non-technical aspects of innovation in R&D. These are around the ethics, the laws, the training and capability development, which are equally essential to how we deploy and manage these systems as the technology themselves. And I think we'll perhaps close with Dr. Uzi and Lieutenant General on that. If we have any time, we can address additional questions. But let's start with the first theme. Your Excellency, Faisal, Tariq, you guys are two leading champions of facilitating both collaboration from the private sector into the public sector, given your backgrounds, and now that you sit in this synergy with yourselves and the National Defense Forces here, could you explain a little bit about the lessons that you have learned over the past few years, and what are some of the challenges that we might face going forward around facilitating collaboration between the public sector, the defense industry, and the private sector, please? Your Excellency, would you like to start?
Sure. Of course, if we look at most of the innovation today in the commercial sector, they are built on a need or an idea. Not everybody knew that we will not be able to live without an iPad in the future, but today there is an iPad in everybody's hand, even kids. And if you go to the Apple study case, they will tell you they were confused. Should they produce 18 million to start or 1 million? And they decided to go with 5, and they've been sold out day one. Again, to identify needs that do not exist is not very applicable in the military domain. Our military domain is always traditional in the way they think. They definitely want the cutting-edge technologies, but at the same time, they want to maintain them within the same concept of operation, within the same ability to deploy forces. And even though they drive innovation in terms pushing the boundary of any product, when it comes to using the right material and the right processing capabilities and the right automation to have the force multiplier effect, we are very conservative in challenging the norm and coming with a new application or a new use. And if you look at the military equipment, I'll take something very simple as a bullet that's been there for almost 100 years. How much innovation have you seen done to a bullet? Recently, we've started seeing those magnetic fuses that can change the type of bullet to be used and define the dispersing time. But again, when it comes to adapting new technologies, some militaries are very conventional in the way they do that. And when it comes to the defense industry that interacting with this routinely, innovation is very limited because they want to build to design, they want to understand their end user requirement, and they want to develop according to those requirements. And that's the challenge we are facing right now with the traditional way we do development in our military sector. And what we're trying to do is to inject more new blood, younger engineers, try to have them look into it from a problem solving mentality. Don't wait for the client to tell you what he wants. Try to figure out what would be his challenge, what would be his problem, and try to think about it from an out-of-the-box kind of perspective and setup. We have established the TTI, Tawazun Technology Innovation. Almost 70% of the team over there is under 30. And they are very brilliant, very energetic. They are engaging with the experts from the world, and we have some experts sitting there. And they are looking at the problems and trying to solve it. And one of the areas that we are focusing on is don't be afraid to reinvent the wheel. Go back to the design board and study the existing design and look how to make them more efficient, better improve the quality of the product itself. If you look at our military missiles or rockets that we use in our system today, some of them go back up to 20 or 30 years with very minimum midlife upgrades. The reality is those technologies have evolved dramatically, but there is a legacy that resists the development of those products. And that's why in Tawazun and working closely with the edge and the industry, we're trying to reinvent the wheel. We're trying to go back to the drawing board, trying to see what is really can be done. First of all, to control the cost. Second, to develop the capabilities of these existing platforms and working closely with our partners to achieve those objectives. And the third one that became very highlighted during the COVID is to maintain a secure supply chain. Of course, there is always the challenge of certifying those products, following military standard and mil-specs that we are addressing carefully and trying to develop our own standards within the UAE that will allow us to continue to drive this innovation. Again, I mean, it's trying to predict the future because a normal development cycle will take anywhere from 2 to 5 years. And by the time you come up with a product that was based on a brilliant idea, it might be obsolete.
Absolutely.
And that's why you need to be very futuristic thinking. And that's why having young blood who are the new generation, you know, who've been playing with games since they are born, I think will add this kind of a new paradigm and shift in the traditional way of development. Luckily for us, in the fourth industrial revolution, the cost of development have dropped dramatically, the speed have improved, the application of AI and simulation model and all those techniques allowed us now to have a better time to market when it comes to different products. And at the same time, it allows us to be creative and innovative in the application we want to present. As we said earlier, if you go since the Cold War era, the ratio in R&D when it comes to military have been decreasing rapidly. Now the percentage of military R&D from the overall R&D budget is between 8 to 10%. If you go to the Cold War era, it's close to 30. So there is a drop in the percentage, and that's a good thing because now the focus in innovation and development is coming from the commercial sector, from the serving humanities as a whole. And the military is more focused into filling the gap. What are the commercial domain is not doing? Let's do it. And at the same time, how to adapt those new innovation and revolution that are coming from the commercial sector into the military sector.
Thank you. You mentioned mil-spec, and I think this is a particularly relevant example in space. I mean, we see the extraordinary progress that companies like SpaceX or Blue Origin or other larger conglomerates have made in a tiny period of time, and part of the way they have achieved those goals is because they have not built necessarily in the way into the standard for mil-spec and even for NASA standards to begin with, right? It's that build fast, use commercial parts, learn the lessons you need in order to innovate your way into the future. I'm curious, Your Excellency Faisal, how has your experience been in Edge, and also as you expand into the research domain as well in that regard?
I think some of the key lessons learned between private sector and being in the government sector is how do you ensure you drive, and I think that's what we're going through at the moment, the essence and the spirit of speed. Speed matters at the end of the day. Speed in decision making. I mean, when we say collaborations and lessons learned between, commercial sector is not used to a very long decision process. Commercial sector dies by a very long. They need a decision, they need rapid approvals, because at the end of the day, time is money. Resource is money. Resource, even though you might be paying for the resource, but if they feel they are not there producing, if they feel they're not there delivering, these resources want to go somewhere else to be able to contribute. So I think one of the things that is happening at the moment in our ecosystem is how are we removing a lot of red tape and bureaucracy that is normally very traditional globally in the defense sector in that regard. They were probably there for the right reason many years ago, globally. I think all of us are relooking at things with a new lens and saying, what do we really need for us to ensure as a country of our size? We're not too large, we're not too small. We're somewhere in that sweet spot, we'd like to think. How do we make sure we design a system and a process and an ecosystem that best brings out our strength? And our strength is the country's ability to be able to make fast decisions, the country's ability to be able to move fast on certain things. So I think one thing that we are seeing at the moment is re-streamlining of roles, re-streamlining of a lot of the bureaucracies that have been there in the ecosystem to be able to achieve faster delivery. The other is, the same point as Excellency Tariq touched on, is it is a traditional industry, fixed with norms and standards and many other things, again for the right reasons. How do we make sure that in the development teams or in the research team, we infuse know-how of the industry from a use case point of view and really help industry and research centers also proactively present to clients solutions that address use cases that they've now interacted with because of the client. So client can tell you a need, but client must not be aware that there is a new chip coming out in the next 3 years that will probably change completely how navigation happens. Client has a need, but he might not be aware about certain technological advance that's happening. It's for industry and research centers to point that out and say, by the way, you seem to have a navigation need or X need or Y need. I know there is a technology that's going to come out in the next 3 or 5 years. Let's plan for it from now. Let's build a solution that maybe might not work today because that chip is not yet ready, but this chip is going to be ready in 3 years, 5 years from now. Let's be ready. And that's, I think, where industry and technologists can bring further insight to their client that are very busy in their operation and their use cases, but might not be aware about everything else that's happening around. So I think the ecosystem that we are setting up between clients, Defense Ministry, Tawazun, industry, research center, we're really trying now to move much faster and setting up this collaborative mode where you're really leveraging the best out of each ecosystem, out of each block in that regard. So for me, I'd sum it up with remove bureaucracy because commercial sector is unable to work with bureaucracy in that regard. Enable a different model and ecosystem of collaboration between the different stakeholders to allow for feedback to come in, to allow for technologies and other inputs to come in for the right decision makers and the right operators to be able to say, oh yeah, okay, that suits me. And last but not least is having then a setup that really encourages people to relook at things. Today, many things in the defense sector heavily relied on software and hardware. In the world we live in, many things are software defined. Software is playing a major role in many applications, which means you can probably do the same job that happened before using heavy reliance on hardware. I mean, you can't avoid hardware in the military part, but maybe many of them can be done by software. It means it can be done faster, can be done in a much more agile way. We can trial it in a much faster way in this regard in the field and tune it compared to, okay, if I build this hardware, probably to tune it I have to go back to drawing board. Software, no, if I play it, something doesn't work, I can tune it probably next week and trial it again. And I think recognizing that you can now develop in a much more agile way due to software and due to software proliferation in many products, frankly changes again the operating model of how much we can use, trial, and tune again and trial. And I think that's what you're seeing at the moment in the ecosystem, at least we have in the UAE. And I think that's what you will see in the next couple of years, at least how we see ourselves in UAE being able to dramatically leapfrog and accelerate many other players in the market due to this restructuring and tuning that's happening in this regard.
Thank you, it's excellent. You mentioned three of my favorite words, speed, speed, and speed. And the reason that speed is important in the context of the fourth industrial revolution, where things are, as we all know, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, is that's the only way for us to actually understand the way the competitive environment is changing, by trying things out, by doing things, by engaging. And that's something which has been, in the context of maneuver warfare, accepted as doctrine for practice, but has yet to make it into R&D, the R&D side of things. So I think this is an extraordinary lesson to be had here. One of the things that we do in the Dubai Future Foundation is we experiment with what we call pre-legal technologies. They're not technically illegal. For example, blockchain, when we first started doing the blockchain work, it wasn't legislated against, it just wasn't technically allowed. And that kind of conservatism would often shut down the type of fast innovation necessary to learn about it. As we look into our cross-border collaborations, I'd like to pass the microphone to His Excellency Kim to explore, when it comes to collaborating with our international partners, we face many similar restrictions on speed through intellectual property right, through export controls, these kinds of things. Could you share some examples from your experience in the Republic of Korea, how you're addressing the international cooperation side of things, please?
예, 국제 공동 연구 개발에 대해서 구체적인 답변을 하기 전에 국제 공동 연구 개발이 굉장히 중요하다고 생각되는데 우리 대한민국 정부의 힘만으로는 방산 연구 개발을 성공시킬 수 없다고 생각하기 때문입니다. 그래서 이러한 문제점을 해결하기 위해서 국방부의 세 가지 노력을 말씀드리고자 합니다. 첫 번째는 민간에 발달된 신기술을 군에 즉시 적용하기 위한 신속 시범 획득 사업 제도입니다. 이것은 작년부터 우리 대한민국 정부에서 제도를 시행을 해오고 있는데 민간에 발달된 기술을 적용한 새로운 장비를 군에서 시범 운용을 해본 다음에 그것이 군의 요구 성능을 만족하면 곧바로 별다른 절차 없이 군에서 대량으로 구매하는 제도입니다. 이러한 제도를 통해서 우리 대한민국 정부는 그동안 10년 정도 걸리던 장기간 소요되던 획득 절차를 2년 이내로 대폭 단축할 수 있을 것으로 기대하고 있습니다. 그리고 두 번째는 우리 대한민국 정부는 그동안은 ADD를 비롯한 대한민국 정부 주도로 연구 개발을 수행을 해왔습니다. 그러나 현재 한국 방산업체의 기술 수준도 상당히 높을 뿐만 아니라 우리 정부의 능력만으로는 새로운 4차 혁명 시대의 기술 수준을 만족시킬 수 없다고 판단을 하고 향후 연구 개발에 있어서는 민간 업체라든가 또 연구기관들 어떤 대학의 힘을 적극적으로 활용하고자 노력을 하고 있습니다. 가장 중요한 부분은 같이 공동 개발을 했을 때 그로 인하여 생기는 지적 재산권을 어떻게 분배하느냐 하는 문제라고 생각하는데 우리 대한민국 정부에서는 작년도에 국방 과학기술 혁신법을 제정을 해서 민간과 정부가 공동 개발을 했을 경우에는 지적 재산권을 공동 소유할 수 있도록 법령 개정을 완료를 한 바 있습니다. 그리고 세 번째가 방금 우리 진행자께서 그 말씀하신 국제 공동 개발인데 우리 대한민국 정부 같은 경우는 몇 년 전부터 인도네시아 정부와 또 우리 방산업체 카이와 함께 KFX 사업, 차기 전투기 사업을 현재 진행 중에 있습니다. 대표적인 국제 공동 연구개발 사업인데요. 이 사업을 하면서 저희가 깨달은 점이 한 가지가 있습니다. 가장 중요한 것이 어떤 돈의 문제, 경제성의 문제도 있을 수 있겠지만 더 중요한 것은 아마 그 참가하는 파트너 국가와의 신뢰 구축이 가장 중요한 요소라는 생각이 듭니다. 이 신뢰 구축은 군사적인 측면뿐만 아니라 정치, 경제, 사회, 문화적인 모든 전 분야에 이르는 파트너 국가와의 어떤 신뢰관계 구축이 국제 공동 연구 개발을 성공적으로 수행하는 데 있어서 필수적인 요소라는 생각이 듭니다. 예, 이상 제 발표를 마치겠습니다. 감사합니다.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I think that is particularly important given the last question, which I'd like to have the panel explore. That's some of the social benefits and economic benefits that the defense industry can produce for society as a whole. We all know, for example, in the United States context, every dollar that was invested in NASA, which itself is a civilian organization but benefited tremendously from the US Air Force and the military expenditure over time, produced $40 of civilian benefits. So the benefits of technology transfer are huge in that context for social and economic growth. But it's not just a technological one. All of the panelists have mentioned various social or human aspects to what innovation requires in R&D. Dr. Uzi mentioned the conservatism of many large organizations that we face. This is not just in the defense industry, this is true for any large organization. And so I would like to ask first Dr. Uzi and then the Lieutenant General to close with a comment on the social science dimension of the R&D and within the defense sector. We have here in the Advanced Technology Research Centers, 7 centers focusing on hardware and software, crypto, quantum, swarming, etc. But if there is one lesson to be learned from recent wars, particularly from maneuver warfare doctrine, it's that the most effective lessons are those which are organizational. How do you break down the barriers in decision making? How do you increase the speed of decision making? How do you train your young people and your young generals and your young civil servants to have this new mindset? So I'm curious, perhaps Dr. Uzi, we could start with you and your experience as well. How should we, from an R&D perspective, invest in creating innovation mindsets? How should we create cultures around the non-technical knowledge that is required to accelerate both our defensive capabilities, but also the economic and social benefits therein? Dr. Uzi, please, would you comment on that given your research?
Thank you. This is, let me conclude from the beginning that there is no school kind of solution here. There is no textbook solution. There are several models of how to preserve and encourage the spark of creativity and innovation in companies. And as I said, the bigger they are, the more difficult they are. And you can see samples in the civilian industry. Look at Google, for instance. It's an experience to visit a Google center. They they create creativity by breaking down the organization into small units and letting every member of the organization be his own innovator. But this is easier in a company which has virtual products. When you have physical products, it's much harder because you have to marry to production lines, and these are very hard to change. In the defense industry, one can bring several examples to mind. The most classic one was a skunk walk of Kelly Johnson in Lockheed. What they did there, they took a genius, they gave him his own sub-organization, they gave him the envelope of the big concern, but let him do his own thing, including his own contracting. He contracted, not the company. With this bunch of geniuses, this was copied by some other companies, and this is one way to do it. Again, it depends very much on individuals. If you have individuals in the right position, the organization thrives. If you bring humdrum heads of skunk works, then the thing kind of peters out. So it's not a sure solution. Another solution is, for instance, scale composites by Bert Rutan. You take another genius, and he's out of the organization. He's not embedded in an organization. It's his own organization, and he's been contracted. The government contracts his creativity and his not just creativity, innovation. If you look at the products of scale product, they are really mind-boggling. So there are very many ways to, as they say, sorry for today, it's not politically correct to say to skin the cat. I mean, we are all out for cats. We don't want to skin them. But there are several ways of doing it. None of them is surefire. But let me say that my experience, the most important element is competition. I found to my experience that if you compete companies against each other for the government's dollar, you get a lot of creativity from them. They are running after it because it means rewards to the people who succeed in their innovation. It's not just money to the companies. It's not just the balance sheet. It's personal credit. It's recognition. It's getting the Israel Defense Prize from the state president. So there's a lot of rewards for being competitive and innovative. Another thing is to keep the organization, look, military and the defense companies, whether government-owned or non-government-owned. In Israel, we have a mixed picture of about the three major companies that you will see tomorrow in the exposition. Two of them are government-owned, and one of them is completely private. It's in the market. Doesn't make any difference. They all compete for the government dollar for their basic R&D. And the thing is to keep a kind of a balance in the decision maker, between the government and the industry. Industries are more innovative than government. I don't say the government is not innovative. We look at the Israel Defense Forces, they innovated in several occasions quite brilliantly. But most of the innovation comes from the industries because they are younger in age, they are in the market, they have the market needs, they see the pressure, they see the technologies much more than the hierarchical military who are busy in honing their skills in the existing procedures. So they are less innovative than them. In our experience, if you kind of balance the decision making, you don't give the government, the military, the right, the right for the last word. You balance between them. You let the industries even sometimes force the military to accept ideas and systems that they think they don't need. And then they found out that they need them. Missile defense in Israel was a prime example. In the United States too, remember Star Wars, most of the intellectual community in the United States was against Star Wars. So in missile defense, we had the same problem of resistance from military and the industry forcing its way. Of course, there is a Minister of Defense who make the final decision, but you keep a balance between the traditionalists and the innovators. You don't give the last word to the traditionalists. Sometimes you overrule them.
Would you have a comment on that?
I think when we refer to innovation and we're referring to how are we having people improve the ecosystem, normally innovation is closely associated with innovation in technology. I think a critical aspect that we all need to also understand, there is also innovation in management and innovation in the operating model.
Yes.
It is equally as important as the innovation in technology. And what I mean by that is, it's a clear fact that today, for example, as a country, the country and the country leadership sets its goal to say, if these are our priority areas, we want to be the number one. It's a simple fact of physics. If we purely adopt what is referred to as best practice globally, and if best practice can achieve this goal in 7 years or 5 years or 3 years, well, guess what? You will not become number one because you're moving at the same speed he is in this regard, which means you need to see what is applicable to him, what was good best practice for him in that regard, What is our sweet spot? How should we innovate in our business model, our decision model, our operating model to make us move faster? Because reality is, if we are number 30 today and want to be number 1, purely adopting best practice, even an operating, forget innovation, even an operating model can never get you to number 1, because how are you going to get to number 1? You need to completely disrupt the way you operate. If he does it in 7 years, you want to do it in 2 years. And if you do it in 2 years, the norm of best practice is a norm. If it's a norm, you will get norm results. Best norm results, but they are norm results in that regard. So I think what at least the current spirit in the country is, it's allowing us now to say, I want to get to number 1 in X, Y, Z field. Yes, you'll innovate in technology, but we are allowing you as stakeholders in the ecosystem to completely disrupt. What does the business model look like? What's good for the US? Let's learn some good things from it, but I can guarantee you it's not the operating model we can operate in. We have a different dynamics, we have different strengths, and we have different weaknesses. So I think every country needs to focus on what is the innovative operating model and business model that helps it drive at a speed 2x, 3x, 10x the norm to become number 1. And I think this is today happening, but I think this is a very important part because it touches on a normal human instinct. People do not like change. And when you are disrupting an operating model and a business model, there is a lot of resistance in the ecosystem. And unless leadership in every country supports that, it doesn't move fast. I think today we are lucky that we could see a lot of disruption happening for us as a system. But I really want to touch on this is, let's learn from best practice, let's take good examples, but let's create a model that really works for us.
Yes.
And what works for us today might be a different model than what works for us in 5 years from today. But we are living today, and we need a model for today in this regard. And I think I could really say in the last 2 years, we are fortunate that we are getting a lot of support to really change the operating model. Forget technology, the operating model that we operate at is getting changed, and that we will learn and we'll make mistakes. But I think it's an important part to keep in mind as we adopt best practices and other things from around the world.
Fantastic. There's so many additional questions that I wish we had time to explore. I do hope that on your last point, we'll see the announcement perhaps of an 8th Excellence Center focused on innovation and business management in social science, because it requires research, it requires funding, but it's with a different set of audiences. It's with artists, it's with lawyers, it's with academics. So perhaps we'll see that soon. I apologize we don't have more time for questions. Please join me in a round of applause for the panelists. And thank you, Your Excellencies, for all of your keen insights today. Thank you.